Hey everyone, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. As I've mentioned on videos before, we have not covered the solar industry, but we probably should. As some of you may know, a solar panel is made up of silicon, takes that silicon and converts sunlight into energy. Not an area I am at all an expert in, so I thought of no one better to bring on to explain some things than Travis Hoium from the Rive YouTube channel. Also, you may have seen Travis's work for the Motley Fool. Travis, thanks for joining me early this morning.
Thanks for having me, Nick. This is going to be exciting. I've made basically every mistake there is possible in the solar industry and learned a lot along the way. So hopefully I'll have a little bit of background from my 15 years experience following this industry.
Hey, mistakes are one of, if not the best way to learn. So let's learn from Travis here. Specifically, Travis, I'm interested in looking at this industry via a company called Enphase Energy, ticker symbol ENPH. So just one more little bit of background here before I hand it over to you with some questions. Enphase, historically anyways, designs and sells inverters, which is basically a chip system critical to a solar panel array. Travis, what exactly is an inverter? And Enphase likes to market that its inverters are way different than everyone else's. Like, for example, let's say SolarEdge, another top provider of these inverters. What's up with this company? Before continuing, let me remind you to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if this video is helpful as you do your own investment research and increase your knowledge of business and technology. We really appreciate the support, as subscribing to the channel helps us continue putting out content like this.
So if I can go back a little bit, this is really a newer technology in inverters. Inverters is basically just turn the DC current, the direct current coming from a solar panel, into alternating current, which is what the grid uses. Now, if Nikola Tesla would have won his battle versus Thomas Edison 100 or so years ago, we would just be using direct current, and this wouldn't be a problem we would have. But as it is today, the solar panels that we have just produce direct current. And so that needs to be transferred to that alternating current in some way, shape, or form. What's traditionally happened is that was done in a single location through what's called a string inverter. And basically a bunch of solar panels would be strung together and converted on, let's say if you're doing a rooftop installation on the side of your house, you just have a string inverter sitting there. And that would be the interface between the solar system and the grid and the power coming into your home. There are a few reasons the industry has gone to what's called module level power electronics. So if you ever see the term MLPE in articles or in commentary, this is something that a lot of these companies talk about. That is a piece of electronics that sits at the solar panel level. So SolarEdge and Enphase are really the two leaders there worldwide. SolarEdge makes a power optimizer. They're not actually converting to AC current at the solar panel level. And Enphase came in and made what's called a micro inverter that does convert from DC to AC current at the solar panel level, and then can be directly piped into your home or to the grid. So that's what they do and why they're a little bit different. Now, they're not the only company that has ever done this. They actually almost went bankrupt trying to scale this business, and were saved from that a handful of years ago. And it was actually SunPower who made the most efficient solar panels in the world, recently spun off that business, but was one of the keys in saving them. And then I think a private equity firm also injected some funds. But they really came out of that as one of the really surprising winners, along with SolarEdge. And they've managed to maintain their market leading position as everything else in the industry has commoditized. So that's kind of where we sit today.
Yeah. And I'll just show a brief graphic here illustrating what you're talking about, Travis. Obviously, the market seems to think Enphase is onto something here, at least evidenced by the stock price. Maybe just to kind of expand a little bit on what you were talking about here, you had an interesting fact that you cited to me actually on Twitter that I think maybe helped kick off this video in the first place about inverters, percentage cost of a whole entire solar system. And then a question on that after I'm sure you're ready to cite that figure. Does that make the inverter makers like Enphase an ideal place to invest in?
Yeah, so the ballpark range that I gave, and to be clear, the cost of a solar installation, specifically on rooftops, varies widely from city to city, from state to state, from country to country. But a typical inverter is going to cost between a microinverter or power optimizer is going to cost between 50 cents and $1 out of a about $3 system that's going to be put on your roof. The solar panel itself now is going to cost 20 to 25 cents. So the revenue that Enphase is generating from any given solar installation is going to be more than double what a company that's making the actual solar panel is making. So I think that's just a fascinating way to look at the industry. And it's kind of confounding the way that it's developed like this, because it's a critical piece, but it's also traditionally been a commodity piece of the supply chain. Where they've really expanded, I think, is because that has become sort of the brains of the system and the hub that people actually interact with. So if you're a solar installer, you can put on any solar panel. But if I'm used to dealing with, in this case, Enphase inverters, that's now become my monitoring solution and the thing that customers sign into to see how much solar they're producing and all that kind of stuff. So you become both a hardware and a software layer. And I think that's why they've become the valuable companies that they have. And I'll lump SolarEdge into that as well. Whether that continues to be the case 5 or 10 years from now, I have a lot of questions, but that is the case for them and the reason that they become the powerhouses that they are right now. Yeah,
fascinating. So a bit of a vertically integrated business then, differentiated hardware, layering the software on top of it. I think we'll talk a little bit about some of the other areas Enphase is trying to expand into here in a moment. But Travis, I've had an issue with this company. I've looked at it off and on over the years, have never gotten myself to even take a start. I can't convince myself to even take a starter position in this stock. And along the way, it's actually scaled quite nicely. As it grows, gross profit margin up to 42%, operating profit margin almost 20%, free cash flow on the way up. But my question with this, I guess, is this a sustainable business that can continue to scale profitably over time?
I have thought no for years, and I have been wrong. And some of my thoughts go back to the scar tissue that I have from, a decade or 15 years ago in the solar industry, where my thesis was that the solar panel was going to be the most important piece of a solar installation and the most valuable piece. And so how do you differentiate yourself with a solar panel? Well, you make a more efficient solar panel or a lower cost solar panel. Companies like SunPower and First Solar were leaders in sort of different ways, but we're both leaders in and they manufactured their own products. Enphase and SolarEdge don't manufacture their own products. That's always something that I've kind of been hung up on as well. They use third-party manufacturers, which helps you leverage that if you're growing, because you don't have the same fixed cost base that you do if you have a manufacturing plant. But what turned out to be the case in the solar industry was that solar panels just commoditized. And it didn't matter if SunPower's solar panels were 23% efficiency and the ones coming from China were 15%, because the ones that were 15% efficiency were 50% lower cost. And so people just took that cost savings and moved to that part of the business. And it just basically drove the costs down for everybody and just commoditized solar panels across the board. We've sort of exited that phase a little bit, where there's starting to be a little bit more differentiation and the cost difference isn't quite the same, but that's still generally the case, is that making solar panels is not a high margin business. And those companies were not successful in vertically integrating. This is another thing I think a lot about business models, and what ended up happening in the solar industry is that the companies that vertically integrated. So they made solar panels. SunPower actually sold off its inverter business to Enphase. That's how they ended up with a big position in Enphase. Did project development, did financing. First Solar and SunPower were two of the leaders, but there's others like Canadian Solar who did that as well. And that basically ended up getting pulled apart. And this happens oftentimes in business where as an industry is in a nascent phase or a maturing phase, companies are trying to figure out what the right business model is. And it turned out that the more efficient business model was focusing on one thing. And so Enphase and SolarEdge came into the market at a time when other companies were trying to vertically integrate, and they said, hey, we're just going to do this one thing. We're going to do it really well. We're going to do it better than anybody else. We're going to offer services that are really valuable to third-party installers, so smaller installers. Now, they don't necessarily have to deal with, a SunPower or some other sort of vertically integrated company. They can just deal with us, buy a commodity solar panel, get their own wiring and anything else that they need for the installation and go about building their own small business. And that it turned out to be very profitable and growing piece of the business. Now, does that sustain? I guess the way that I look at it right now is I think that this will probably continue to be the highest margin piece of the solar installation business, particularly on the residential side of things. Do they maintain a 40% gross margin and over 20% net margin? I would think there's going to be competition coming to this market. We could get into how they've grown into a market that didn't exist, the module level power electronics market. Solar installations existed. They were basically growing into green space. That green space is much smaller than it was 5 years ago. So, and there was a regulatory push behind them getting into this business as well. Basically, in the U.S. and Europe, mandating that you have to have a module level power electronics. Well, when there's only two suppliers, you got to pick: are you going to do microinverters or are you going to do power optimizers? And that was basically the choice that companies had, was between those two companies. 5 years from now, I would think that there's going to be competition, but we've been hearing about competition coming for years, and it hasn't really materialized. So, but I look at those cost numbers and how much the equipment costs, and there's one spot in the value stack, in the value chain for the solar industry that can be squeezed, and that's at the inverter and the power optimizer level. It hasn't happened yet. But that would be my fear, is that you're paying a very high price for companies that could end up being the next solar panels that just get squeezed into oblivion. And again, like I said, I'm bringing my own scar tissue and biases into this analysis, and that's what I have seen in the past.
Those are some good points, and I think you have very valid reason for being gun shy on this. One thing I think is interesting, I'll just add to this so that my presence here is justified in the first place. One thing I do think is interesting about Enphase and SolarEdge is they've kind of turned, like you mentioned, Travis, a commoditized part, a component of a solar system, and almost turned it into like the brains of the whole solar system, which is interesting because, as we know, in the rest of the computing technology world, logic chips tend to carry some of the highest cost of a whole computing system, like a high-end CPU and a PC, for example. So it's interesting that they've figured out a way to basically do that with a solar array, add the software layer to it. One other thing that kind of makes me a little bit nervous at this point too, and then maybe you can weigh in on this. Enphase has now started to dabble in energy storage, basically big batteries that you can put into your home, as well as car chargers, EV charging stations. Made a couple of acquisitions. That's yet another commoditized part of the renewable energy space that I'm not. If I was an Enphase shareholder, I'd be a little antsy about seeing those new businesses get mixed in.
So I think the argument for those additions in particular is if you're just if you make one component in a solar system, that's going to be something that all of these other pieces in the value chain are going to try to lump the microinverter or the power optimizer into what they're selling. So let's continue with SunPower as an example. They've tried this in the past, right? We're selling you a solar panel. Why don't we just put the microinverter on the solar panel at the factory, and then when we ship it, you'll have it right there. That is, 5-8 years ago, that's the way that I thought the industry was moving, and it hasn't. But that still could happen. The case for adding energy storage and charging in particular is that, like you said, this is the brains of the solar system. So if you're the brains, then you're the one that's going to be controlling when is power added to the battery, when is it pulled from the battery to power the house, when is it going to the grid, when are we charging the car. These smart systems have always been sort of the vision of particularly the solar installers. In the US, we have SunPower and Sunrun are kind of the two that are left. Solar City was acquired by Tesla. That has not turned out to be the vertically integrated giant that Musk kind of sold it as. But, those were the three companies that were trying to figure out, okay, how do we create this full energy solution, this home energy solution? And I think Sunrun and SunPower kind of still have that vision. Whether or not they'll get there, they're starting to lump together, energy storage and charging, and obviously the solar system as well. And then they're the software that you interact with. If you're a homeowner, you have an app from one of those two companies. I think that would be one way that we could go. We could also go a way where the microinverter or power optimizer, that piece of the system, continues to be the brains, and then things like energy storage and chargers just end up being commodities that get added to that system, like the solar panel is. And maybe that's the way that it goes, that it goes, and these two companies add them to their portfolio anyways, and you try to do like a scorched earth strategy where you have this really powerful business, and then you make everything around it a commodity and zero margin, and then you just try to protect the core. But if investors think that the energy storage business is then also going to be a 40 to 50% margin business, or the charger business is going to be a 40-50% margin business, that's not going to happen. So I think that's, we need to just have the right expectations and what their strategy is. Companies don't often go, hey, we're going to add this piece of the business and it's going to be a zero margin business for us because we just want to protect this core. That's not the way that they speak to investors, but that is probably at least a piece of the strategy that they're trying to lay out. But, both of those things have been hard to stick together in one system. We've been talking about, it makes a ton of sense to have a charger and a battery attached to your solar system for years, and the attach rate in the US at least is still 15 to 30% at best. So it's just not growing in the way that I think a lot of people thought that it would. Maybe we get there 10 years from now, but we're just not there right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of ways this could backfire. You just gave me a thought with all of this added vertical integration that maybe the solar panels, obviously kind of an analog type of silicon device. You've got the brains, the inverter, maybe that's like the CPU, and then all of this energy storage stuff is maybe like the memory of a traditional computing system. That level of vertical integration has not worked well as of late in the semiconductor industry. I think most people are more familiar with, like, say, an Intel, which has been trying to suddenly exit some of those ancillary pieces of business because it's just not that profitable anymore. It'll be interesting to see if something similar happens for a company like Enphase. Like you said, maybe in 10 years from now, maybe it works. It could fall flat on its face, though, too. So, Travis, you know a lot about the solar power industry, the energy space in general. If not Enphase, is there a stock that would meet your criteria as a good investment right now?
The two solar stocks that I still hold today, and they're older positions that I've held for, maybe close to a decade at this point, is SunPower and First Solar. First Solar is the one that I think is the best position right now because they have differentiated manufacturing. About half their manufacturing is located in the U.S., so they're getting a huge tailwind from the Inflation Reduction Act, which added a bunch of money for not only solar, but also manufacturing in the U.S. So they get kind of a double whammy there. And their technology has proven over time, this is a company that made solar panels that were a 50% margin in 2008, 2009. So if you want to see history of what this could look like on the downside, just look at First Solar's history. Those margins went down to single digits for a very long time, but they have kind of slowly chipped away and continued improving their technology as these commodity manufacturers that are typically coming from Asia have just sort of hit a wall from both a efficiency and a cost standpoint. And First Solar just kind of keeps getting a little better every year. And now we're at the point where they have kind of their specific niche. They're really good in desert environments. They're really good for utility scale solar. So you kind of know exactly where they're going to be, where they're going to be installing. They're not going to be making something for your roof, at least not yet. But they are going to be probably what you see if you're flying over, the deserts in the Southwest in the U.S. Is probably a First Solar solar panel. So their finances are getting better. They're doubling their capacity between about now and 2 years from now, and potentially even more than that over the next few years. They keep adding plants that they're either expanding or building. So I think they're really well positioned. The stock has done very well recently. So maybe now isn't a great entry point, but that's one that I would put on your radar. SunPower is one that it's a much better value than Sunrun, which is its most direct competitor, and its finances continue to improve. They've gone through a number of strategic changes over the last 5 years, basically now just focused on being sort of the technology layer in residential solar installations and providing tools to third parties. They've also bought some actual installers, so they actually have boots on the ground, if you will. But I continue to think that sort of a premium residential solar solution and the partnerships they have with, I think it's like 9 out of 10 of the home builders in the U.S. is going to be a good place to be. They've had a hard time making money. It has been very helpful for them to have gotten 7.5 million shares of Enphase Solar when they sold off what was effectively kind of a garbage microinverter business to them. That has allowed them to essentially get rid of all of their debt. So they're in a much better financial position today. I'm less certain about what the future looks like there, but again, I think that's the best way to get exposure without taking huge valuation risk. So that's where my head is at, is with those two. Those are both U.S. companies for a reason. The Chinese companies specifically in solar have been very risky for a variety of reasons. But they have a technology lead. They have something you can point to that says this is what they do better than anything else. And I'm not paying out the nose like I am with Enphase or SolarEdge. If those two companies were cheaper, they would 100% be the two picks that I would have. But that's my problem right now, is paying up for companies that traditionally have been commoditized over time.
Okay. Yeah, that's my issue as well. As far as I can tell, commoditized. I think you've convinced me it's maybe less commoditized than I've historically thought, but still the valuation concerns me with Enphase. Thanks for sharing those two. I'll just add one more pick. It's one that I don't own yet, but On Semiconductor, which is another historically commoditized business, manufactures power chips. But in recent years, they have a new management team that has a great track record with kind of decommoditizing a chip manufacturing business. And one area that they focused on is a new substrate for chips called silicon carbide, SiC, that's being used actually in inverters. They said recently that 7 of the world's top 10 inverter companies actually use On semi components. So when I look at a company like Enphase, they only have about 40% gross profit margin. That always automatically tells me some sort of supplier or contract manufacturer is gobbling up a ton of money at Enphase's expense, a company like Enphase's expense. So one of the companies I've kind of landed on here as a potential addition to my portfolio for solar and renewable in general is on semiconductor. Much more reasonable valuation if we think the solar industry and renewables are going to be a hot investment theme for the next 5 to 10 years. Travis, thank you for joining me on this. It's been helpful for me, helps me increase my understanding of this particular aspect of the semiconductor industry. Hope to have you on again. Everyone, Travis Hoium, make sure you check out his work on the Rive YouTube channel. And then also links, Travis, you have links to your Motley Fool work there as well on Rive?
Yep, there's links to that, and then a newsletter that I have that's based on Rive and the disruption going on in business today as well. So you can find all that stuff on the YouTube channel.
Travis, thanks again for joining me. Until next time, everyone.